How do you know if a construction technology solution is right for your company? My guest today, Scott Ellison, has a quick test that you can use every single time someone comes and knocks on your door and pitches you the latest and greatest technology solution, so that you are very clear on what to look to adopt and what to avoid. And that is just one aspect of our conversation today as we dive into the world of construction tech. And Scott's perspective is very interesting because he's actually a consultant, investor, and advisor to multiple built tech startups. And so he comes from the point of view of looking at the industry, thinking about the particular needs of the industry from a technology perspective, and the solutions that may be able to help us in construction be more efficient, be safer, and build more profitably. So I know you're going to enjoy my discussion with Scott, and I want you to stick around to the end. He introduces himself at the beginning and mentions a sabbatical that he took in his career. And at the end of our conversation, I get into a little more detail around that sabbatical, and we discuss some of the great places that he visited and some of the activities that he took part in particular, fly fishing for bonefish in saltwater. That's an interesting part of our conversation, so I know you'll enjoy that. Feel free to share this with other people that you think would benefit from the discussion. Thank you for listening to Construction Genius, and enjoy my conversation with Scott. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Scott, welcome to Construction Genius.
Eric, it's a pleasure.
I'm bringing you on because you have deep experience in the whole arena of construction tech. So I'd just like you to give a quick introduction of yourself to the Construction Genius audience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an honor to be part of the podcast. I have been a listener and have some companies that I've been involved with who are big fans of yours. So thanks for having me on. My background is actually not in construction professionally, or at least it wasn't until the past few years. I'm a recovering strategy consultant and was at a growth equity firm for a number of years. Took a early mid-career break and traveled for a couple of years from Antarctica to Mongolia and got my pilot's license. And then I've been doing CFO consulting, investing, advising I'm based in San Francisco, which doesn't necessarily mean those are the companies that I spend time with, particularly in the past few years. But the intersection with the built world for me is a personal one. For the longest time, I have a number of family members who are general contractors, real estate managers, and investors. And for many years, actually, my professional life and my personal life didn't seem to intersect much when I'd get together with uncles and in-laws over the holidays. I also should mention that one of my formative jobs growing up was working in a hardware store, but this was before Home Depot, when the hardware stores in local towns were really general contractor supply stores. And I absolutely loved that environment. I loved the people. I loved the fact that I could drive with my new driver's license and see projects that I was actually involved with, obviously on a peripheral level, but at least seeing, I just talked to this GC and they came in to buy XYZ supplies. So it was with a bit of excitement, actually, about 3 or 4 years ago when I started seeing some fundamental trends, and we'll get into them, and your audience is well familiar with them at this point, but ones that I thought were likely to change the way that tech was thought about in the sector. And we can go into detail on that, but that led me to focus almost all my time on what I think of as built tech. So it's where technology intersects the full design, construction, and then building operations continuum. But I'd say probably 2/3 of my time I've been spending in construct tech. There's just an enormous amount that can be done that I think should be done, needs to be done, but needs to be done in such a way that it's not just tech being offered to the sector, but they're tools that can actually be used in such a way that they make the job of a general contractor or contractors writ large more effective.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because I know from the perspective of a construction company owner. I have folks knocking on my door all day with the latest and greatest app or technology or something like that. And number one, there's a sense of overwhelm. There can be a sense of fatigue, a sense of almost numbness when it comes to what should I do to improve my company and put some of these tools in my toolkit. So describe that fatigue as you see it from an outsider's perspective.
Yeah, well, it's such a well-known phenomenon that it actually has a name in construct tech, app fatigue, right? Maybe not particularly creative, but describes exactly what you're talking about. And it's a phenomenon that happens in any sector as it starts to ramp up the adoption of new technology. I like to talk about it with a personal anecdote because I've shared this before, but we had a big tree come down on our property a couple of years ago. So I had to hire a stump grinder to come out and remove the base of it. And when they showed up, it struck me that if they had said, Scott, we have the greatest cutting edge hammer that's cloud connected and AI enabled and will tell you exactly how to use it as efficiently as possible and connect back into all your financial systems, I would have said, guys, you're talking to the right person. I'm really interested in that, but I need this stump out of the ground, and that's not going to help me. And I think there's a natural temptation for any founder or any team, executive team in a construct tech company to get seduced by the technology that they're developing. It's a natural temptation. That's where they're spending all their time. That's why they're excited about doing what they're doing. But ultimately, the only thing that matters is when they go out to the customer, potentially to the job site, are they delivering a tool that makes the workers or the particular company more effective? If they are, then there's a conversation to have. If they're not, then it's a science project.
So let's talk about that at the moment. How can I, as a CEO of a construction company, know that when someone is pitching me a tech app or some sort of built tech product or solution, how can I know fairly quickly whether or not that's a fit for me?
Oh, I think it's entirely fair to have a 5-minute test. And by that, I mean a company, a startup, or the sales representative for the startup early on should be so clear on the ROI, or at least the reason why you should try their technology, that it's obvious in the first 5 minutes. And if it's not similar to the AI cloud connected hammer, you just say, hey, it's fantastic. You seem like a smart team and good people, but maybe we're not the best for you right now. Why don't we re-engage in a couple of years?
It's interesting. As you look at the tech companies that are focused on the construction industry, there tends to be two types. The first type is someone who is from the outside. They have a good understanding of technology. They see the inefficiencies in construction and they try and bring something to the market. Then you have someone who is perhaps from construction and knows some of the pains experientially, but perhaps doesn't have the technical chops to bring to market something that would be useful. In your experience working with these built tech companies, how do you see that dynamic playing out?
It's a really important dynamic. One of the things that I'm focused on in talking to entrepreneurs is whether they either have a reason to be super interested in construction. Often there's a connection, some sort of family connection, like mine, maybe it's even more involved. And I can give you examples of that. And then I'll say because I've most recently had the real privilege actually to get involved with a company that was started by an individual who is an elite Silicon Valley software engineer, 7 years at Stripe out of MIT, and would be considered in general one of the best, regardless of sector. This individual does not necessarily have a connection to construction. But what I tested a lot with him early on in talking, whether he had the empathy muscle and the real interest in what the problem was that he was solving, as opposed to getting back to this question before, the problem he was solving as opposed to the technology he was developing. And in Adam's case, I think anyone who's talked to him, including his early customers now, would say that he does. But the flip side, I would say, and this is just generic example, is an individual who has just heard that construction is a $1 trillion industry and it's 20 years behind in terms of tech adoption and thinks, wow, I'm a really smart technologist. This should be easy. That's a pretty good, recipe for disaster early on.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that about the empathy muscle. I know that as myself being an outsider in construction, I think the one reason why I've resonated with construction companies over the years is because of the respect that I have for the industry and the understanding that what they do is, number one, very hard, but also tremendously impactful in a positive way upon their communities. And so I think that's vital, that empathy muscle and that idea of respect for the industry as you're approaching it as an outsider.
Yeah, I mean, just to expand on that, I like to remember frequently and remind companies, CEOs and founders that I'm involved with that humans have been building standalone structures for 10,000 years. I won't even try to pronounce it, but in Turkey, 9,700 years ago. We've been putting up skyscrapers for almost 150 years. So we figured out how to do it. We know how to build buildings. So unless you're walking in with something that makes that process better, then it'd be natural for whoever you're talking to say, hey, that's great. We already know how to do what we need to do.
It's interesting because there's so many people that I do think they see the inefficiencies in construction and they're always trying to make construction something that it isn't. It's not essentially a manufacturing process, though there are manufacturing elements involved. And so as you look at the adoption of tech in construction, it's funny because I read the same articles year after year after year, it seems like, about the issues in construction and how those issues need to be overcome, and yet the issues still remain. But your conviction is that the adoption of tech and the acceleration of that is going to increase rapidly in the next 10 years. Can you explain why you have that conviction?
Yeah, although I would edit your statement a little bit. I don't know how fast it's going to increase. I don't know if it's going to be rapidly. My bet is that the tech adoption curve is going to be steeper in the next 10 years than it was in the last 20. How much steeper? I don't know. But even if it's just a little bit steeper, there are going to be some interesting companies built because there's so much low-hanging fruit that can truly deliver value along the way. So if it is rapid and it is a steep adoption curve, then I, as someone and any of us who are involved with tech companies in the space are going to be thrilled in a decade, and maybe it will be. But I think we always have to be intellectually honest, say, maybe 10 years from now, Scott and Eric of 2033 will be talking about the same dynamics. I mean, it's possible, right?
Yep. So then in terms of the low-hanging fruit, and I do think that is a tremendously important perspective to have when you're looking to adopt tech, is to really hit that low-hanging fruit. In your view, where is some of that low-hanging fruit in terms of tech adoption in the industry at the moment?
Well, I'll come to that in a second, but I wanted to mention one other thing regarding tech adoption. And I think it's really easy, particularly for smart people who are used to solving complex problems, to walk into a space and say, this, that, and the other are inefficient ways of doing things. And particularly in Silicon Valley, like putting on my tech investor hat, there's the famous saying by Zuckerberg at Facebook Meta that, you need to move fast and break things and disrupt everything. And that's all good. And by definition, as a startup company, you're disrupting something. But I've come to believe that you need to have a respect to disrupt ratio greater than 1 in this sector. That there are some things that can be disrupted. And quite frankly, there are the other things that it doesn't really matter if you as an entrepreneur think that there's a better way of doing things. Again, going back to we've been putting up skyscrapers for 150 years. That's how things are done in the industry. And so figuring out that sweet spot of where you can disrupt and where you just have to say, all right, I respect this, and this is how the industry goes about things, I think is really important.
Where do you think that sweet spot lies?
Different for every company.
Can you give me an example of a couple, maybe one from a GC perspective and one from a sub?
I'll give you an example that always makes me chuckle when I think about it, and did originally when I heard it. One of the companies I'm involved with is building a new platform for streamlining the purchasing materials process in the sector. Right now, as many of your listeners know, things are still, believe it or not, done on fax machines, which is just to say the reason they are is because fax machines happen to be really efficient and everyone has one in various construction supply stores, right? So fine, it gets the job done. In the early days of this company's evolution, they were looking at that and saying, this is absolutely ridiculous. Can you believe this industry is still using fax machines? And then they realized this dynamic. The CEO of this firm, of this company, describes what I described as respect disrupt as gentle disruption. But they realized, hey, you know what? There are certain things that we can't disrupt. And one of them in their case, by the way, was that suppliers gave customers sports tickets. Of course, that happens in any industry. It's been happening in construction forever. But they realized that they had to actually make it easy for that exchange to still happen if they were going to ask someone, no matter how great the app on their phone was, that was going to streamline and take things away from the fax machine and put it in a format that is much more efficient and enjoyable. But they also realized, hey, there's certain things about this process that we better include, even if we, from a sort of theoretical standpoint, say, boy, that doesn't really make sense.
Do you see a time when all of these apps are consolidated under maybe 5 or 6 software platforms that dominate the industry? Do you see it going that way, or will there still be sort of this dispersion that we're seeing at the moment?
I don't know, because it certainly could go that way, and a lot of people would predict that. And not to talk my book, but another company I'm really excited about that I've been involved with for a year or so, started by a team who has an incredible tech background. They actually built the intelligence layer inside that runs Alexa now before starting this company. And what they're doing now is building, I don't think they certainly wouldn't describe it as middleware, but it's a piece of software functionality that allows a variety of point solutions to more effectively and quickly interconnect, so that you avoid the problem that currently exists in the industry of data islands, right? These pockets of data that end up getting isolated, and you end up being less efficient after you've adopted 3 pieces of software than you were before you did. So I kind of hope that there's a middle ground, not a 5 platforms or 3 platforms. We all know the names that are leaders now, and that I don't think the industry is going to advance if we don't solve this kind of data island point solution problem. But there might be something in the middle, which would be exciting.
Hey, this is Eric. I hope you're enjoying my conversation with Scott. Quick break to remind you of something that's not tech related directly, but it does involve the heartbeat of your company, and that is your people. My book, Construction Genius: Effective, Hands-On, Practical, Simple, No BS, Leadership, Strategy, Sales, and Marketing Advice for Construction Companies. Let me give you a quick shout out to all the introverts out there. If you are introverted and you don't like to sell, then Chapter 11 and Chapter 12 are absolutely essential for you in this book. Chapter 11 is Sales, Know, Like, Trust, Buy. And then Chapter 12 is all about marketing. Be where they're looking. And those 2 chapters will revolutionize the way that you do sales and marketing in your construction company. And that's why you should run out to Amazon right now and spend $20 and buy this book. In fact, it's not even $20. It's $19.99 for the paperback. All right, so grab the book. I know you'll find it beneficial. And now let's get back to my conversation with Scott. When you're seeing construction companies trying to take on a new piece of technology, what do you think are the biggest mistakes they make that could be easily avoided if maybe they were a little more thoughtful?
I think a lot of firms are getting better at this, but the sales process in construct tech is twofold. It's 1, the office, and then it's 2, the field. And the office is, let's talk about a head office or maybe even a regional office. That's the natural place to think about where you need to sell. But the reality is that construction workers can get really creative about why they're not using a particular piece of technology, or why this technology broke and it's not reliable and it's making things less efficient, and now we're late on this project. And so I think one of the keys over the next decade is going to be the companies who figure out we got to sell to both sides, or at least think about both sides. How easy is it, whatever it is that we've developed, to use by someone who quite frankly, is not interested in going to training for 2 weeks to figure it out? There's a real high bar on eliminating friction before you can hand a piece of technology to someone in the industry and say, hey, go use this because it will help you do the following things.
I know, Scott, that you One thing I like about you, I can just pick up, is that you've said "I don't know" a couple of times, which I really, really appreciate. What I'd like to ask you, though, is what do you think are a couple of the tech angles that perhaps are not big news right now that could be bigger news and have a higher impact in the next few years?
I think if we look out towards the latter part of the decade, I'm a believer that we're going to increasingly see the adoption of technology like small robots and small drones and other hardware and other technology that's not going to replace workers. And I know that's the first place that people's mind goes. And perhaps there'll be some of that. I don't know. But more importantly, I think it's going to help change the job of a construction worker. So I'll give you one example. There's a company, I'm not involved with them, but I'm really intrigued, and I know the CEO, intrigued about what they're doing, that's developing a robot to streamline the drywall installation process. So that process, anybody who's ever even put up drywall in their own home knows that the taping and the mudding and the sanding and the process is really messy, right? I mean, these people were wearing masks long before the rest of us were the last couple of years. And what this company has developed is a robot not that does the job all by itself autonomously, but one that in essence needs a human driver, right? Someone who's there using it, but using it to be more efficient at what they're doing. And in a world that, as we all know, has a huge gap between the number of workers that are needed and the number of workers that we have, I think part of the excitement over the next decade is going to be to see the job description of a lot of construction jobs start to change in such a way that it's a lot sexier to say you're a robot driver than a drywall and mud installer.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things whenever someone starts complaining about replacing of workers through technology, I just think, dude, we've been talking about the worker shortage in construction since I can remember. So that is not something that should be an issue. We should be pushing against that because there's plenty of opportunity for people in the industry, even if there is a wholesale tech adoption, just because of the nature of construction. It's not going to take away people. It's going to be like you described, where you have people who are more efficient because they're using these tools that are being brought to the market.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think about what are the tools, what are the new types of tools that have been introduced to the sector over the past, call it 4 or 5 decades, right? Battery-powered equipment, power saws in some cases, right? At each point, you could have said, boy, you know what, that's so efficient, it's going to take someone's job. And perhaps it did in some cases, but in many more cases, it just made things more efficient and actually a more enjoyable work environment.
So as an investor, when someone's pitching you on a new technology or when you're looking at the makeup of a company in terms of the ones that you want to make a bet on, and I like the fact that you said, I'm betting on these things, or I believe. So there's art and science involved here. There's no guarantees. What do you look for as an investor in those companies that you want to invest your time and money in?
So I think there's a fundamental sort of level of skill related to whatever this company is developing, software or hardware. That's relatively easy to test for. It's the other thing that I believe will end up determining the winners over the next decade. And we mentioned it before, which is the empathy muscle. So you could have the greatest technologists in the world. If they don't have the empathy muscle in construction, they're not going to last very long. You know, I've spoken with some friends recently about a thought experiment that sounds hyperbolic at first, but I actually think it's actually more accurate than not, which is all of us have encountered ChatGPT over the past few months. It's my belief that if you took in a thought experiment the ChatGPT technology, which is extraordinary technology, right? Holding aside ethical judgments and everything else, extraordinary technology, and you dropped it into a generic construct tech company and said, you can use this, but the only place you can use this is construction. It would be possible and perhaps even likely to screw that up if they messed up the go-to-market, meaning incredible technology, but if they didn't really think about how can this, to our earlier discussion, make things better, more efficient, more productive, you'd end up with a shell of technology that never went anywhere.
Yeah. I think it's fundamental from my discussions in the industry. The place that construction companies make money, obviously, is in the field with the work that's put in place. And the companies that are the most successful at technology adoption, the construction companies, are the ones who go to the field and ask the guys and the gals in the field that are doing the building, what do you need to be more effective in doing your job so that we can make more money, and then taking those answers and providing them tools that fit that from the tech sector.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think there's another piece that one of the things that makes me bullish about the sector in the next 10 years is that there's an undeniable change in terms of generations that's happening, which isn't to say, the family members that I alluded to before are the ones that are graying out and leaving the industry. And I love them, and it'd be great if we could freeze father time, but that's not going to happen. And what's happening instead is that if you're, call it middle of Gen X or younger, you grew up as a digital native. So nobody has to tell you why paper and pen, even fax machine is less efficient. Nobody has to make that sale to you. You just understand it. It's intuitive. Then if you go down to the millennial and the Gen Z cohort, they're mobile native, they're social media native, and they're used to doing everything in life on those platforms. And so there's certainly an aspect, I agree, that talking to the workforce is important, but it's also talking to the right people in the workforce who don't have this is how we used to always do it, and therefore that's how we're always going to do it 20 years from now. It's talking to the people who are open-minded about a better solution.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I'm wondering, well, I'm not wondering, I think I know that the folks who are like, I'm thinking about my kids' age, my oldest kids now are teenagers, but they're going to be the ones who are the AI natives, the Chat GPT natives. And their whole way that they look at their environment is going to be driven through that sort of technology and that kind of interface. It's very interesting to think about. So tell me, how do you think, as you're looking at the AI technology, and I know there's a lot of complexity here, but what do you think are some of the practical applications of AI in construction?
Well, the first one that jumps to mind, and again, I apologize for bringing up companies as examples that I'm involved with, but I'll even name this company. Document Crunch is the name of the company. It was started by two individuals who were construction attorneys, one for 3 decades, one for maybe a decade. And what they realized was that they were constantly asked the same questions by the field related to risk management, related to insurance policies, related to contracts. Over and over again, it was the same thing, slightly different. There was a different name on the project, but it was the same question. They also realized that the people who were having the biggest impact on risk management, on insurance, on contracts, weren't sitting in their chair back in the home office, but were out making decisions on the front lines. And so what they've developed, and it's early, but they're getting terrific feedback from the industry and doing very well, is a platform that essentially they would describe it as democratizes risk management and democratizes the understanding of policies, insurance policies, contracts, all those different things that none of us like to read, even if we spend a lot of time doing it in investing or legal work. And their fundamental, value proposition is to say, let's push the intelligence out as far as we can and stop having this ivory tower in the back office.
Yep. Yeah, just so the audience knows, I had Josh on the show, episode 217, Understand Your Contract, Safeguard Your Rights, and Maximize Your Profits. And the thing I love about Josh, as you said, Scott, is that he comes from the industry, so he knows the pains. And so he's one of those guys who has that empathy muscle. I think that's vital when it comes to everything that we're talking about here.
Well, Josh is a superstar. Hi, Josh, if you're listening. Big fan of everything he's doing. And he's building a great team as well.
Now, I want to take you back to earlier in the interview. You mentioned something I thought was pretty interesting, is that you took some sabbatical out and you traveled from Antarctica to Mongolia. And I want you to tell the audience a little bit about that, because I think it's something that we think about sometimes when we've been in business for a while. It'd be nice to get away for a couple of years. What led you to that sabbatical and things that you decided to do?
Yeah, so I had financial flexibility because I had been working incredibly long hours for over a decade coming out of undergrad, basically to pay back loans. I mean, we can talk about that as a whole nother topic as to why workforce may be changing in the sector too. But holding that aside, I had the financial flexibility. I was not tied down with family or, a wife at the time. And the firm that I was at was changing the kind of work that was being done. And I just realized that right at that point, it was sort of an inflection point for me that, I could do a variety of different things. And the path of least resistance was to continue on in investing and working for firms and But thankfully, I had a couple of folks that I had conversations with. I said, "Hey, I've got this wild idea that I'm thinking about doing," and both of them had 25 years plus on me at the time, and they said, "If I ever had the chance to do it, I would have done that in a heartbeat." And quite frankly, I don't know too many people that would not do it. And so, if you can get over the fear of doing something a little unconventional, go do it. And, you won't look back. And they were right. No doubt about it.
So you traveled from Antarctica to Mongolia. Were you flying? Were you doing the flying there?
No, I was coming back occasionally to San Francisco, which is where I lived. And I ended up getting my pilot's license here. But no, I wasn't flying in Antarctica. That would be fun. And in fact, my brother just went down a couple of months ago and flew in. But no, I was traveling more conventionally.
So in your travels, what was the highlight of those travels?
So part of what I was doing was fishing. I love to fly fish. And the highlight, there were many different highlights from the people I met. Ultimately, that was probably the highlight, to just being in some incredibly beautiful places around the planet, places that I've both real pictures and pictures in my memory of extraordinary spots all over the globe.
Why do you like fly fishing?
It's an excuse actually to get out into some of the most incredible places. Trout tend to live in beautiful places, and the same is true on the saltwater side. So it ends up being a cool excuse to get outside.
That's great. And so saltwater fly fishing, I didn't know that was such a thing. Educate me a little bit here.
A number of different species that you can go after. One of the best known is called a bonefish that looks like they can get to 20 pounds, typically more in the 3 to 10 pound range. And when you pull them out of the water after you've caught them, looks like someone took a bunch of pieces of a mirror and stuck it together as their scales. Just an extraordinary fish. But what makes it really fun is that you have to cast a long way, usually in windy conditions. So there's a challenge to that. And then when the fish hits, they end up swimming so fast that it's akin to lassoing a motorcycle at a red light. And all of a sudden, the light changes and all hell breaks loose. And it's a good time.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What's the one place in all of your travels that you would recommend that someone goes to?
Oh, boy.
I ask the tough questions.
Yeah, well, only because there's so many.
I know.
There's controversy about traveling to Antarctica because of global warming and the fact that, if you participate in going down there and it's not as a science project, then you're arguably contributing to issues there. I think without question, when people ask me the most extraordinary place I've ever been, it's that. It's not even a second thought.
And why is that?
Stunning beauty, pristine nature, place with, even though the continent has been experiencing a lot of changes, it feels like you're dialing back 100 years to the way that Shackleton and other early explorers probably saw it.
That's awesome. So Scott, as we're just wrapping up here, top 2 or 3 pieces of advice to a construction company CEO who's looking to make sense of the tech wave, the tech curve, and how they can most, take advantage of that as we get into the next 3, 4, 5 years.
Well, I think the first one's, I'll steal it from you because I think it's a good idea. Go out and talk to your workers, but make sure you're talking to the right ones. If you're talking to, there's going to be a cohort who will be tech phobic and just won't be interested in not only tech, but also change phobic, right? That's another dynamic. But if you're talking to the right ones, you'll pretty quickly get it under, and not just about what could they be doing better, but particularly with the younger cohort, understanding how are they managing their life? What are they using to do that when they're off the job site? And are there pieces of that make sense to integrate into their workflow in construction in such a way that it's more enjoyable for them, it's more efficient, and you've created an environment that's, in essence, more accepting of the way that they like to live and work and play and interact.
Excellent. Excellent. So tell us just a little bit more about yourself. I know you did it at the top, but how can people get in touch with you? How can they hang out with you or virtually if they want to learn more about what you're doing and the companies you're working with? Yeah,
we can put my LinkedIn profile in the show notes, I'm sure, or just look me up, Scott Ellison. There's a few of us floating around, but I'm based in Silicon Valley in San Francisco. And yeah, you'll see some of the companies that I've been fortunate to be involved with. And I always love to chop it up around built tech. So feel free to reach out.
That's great. We'll put the link in the show notes there. And I'm just looking at the companies you're working with. I can see a couple of those that I'm familiar with. So I'm glad that you're working with such high-end folks. I really appreciate you joining us here today, Scott. Thank you for your insights, and I do wish you the best.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for doing the podcast. Thank you for sharing the insights that you do and for keeping an important conversation going.
Yep, awesome. It's my privilege. Thanks a lot. Hey, this is Eric. Thank you for listening to my interview with Scott. And make sure that you go onto LinkedIn and check out where Scott is, connect with him there, and I'll put that link in the show notes. Just before you bounce away, I want to give you a quick reminder. One of the biggest challenges that construction leaders have is when they move into a new position. Let's say you've got a senior project manager who is technically very sound. You can put him or her on one of your most difficult projects and they'll just knock it out of the park. And then you look at that person and an opportunity for them to move into senior leadership happens and they shift up into that senior leadership role. But now they're no longer project focused, but they're focused on building a team of people. That's a very difficult transition to make, particularly if someone has an engineering mindset. So how can you help them make that transition? One of the ways is by getting them an executive coach, someone like myself who has been working with construction executives for 20 years, who knows the difficulties of making that shift and has worked with many construction executives to successfully succeed. That's pretty good, right? Successfully succeed in a leadership role. So if you're interested in getting some executive coaching for some of your high-performing leaders who may be having a struggle in making that shift from building projects to building people, go to my website, constructiongenius.com. Go to the Contact Me page. Fill in your details then. That'll come to my inbox and I'll respond to you within 24 hours. And we can have a very short conversation about if or how I can help. And we'll figure out if there's something I can do to help your leaders to be more successful. So thanks again for listening to Construction Genius. Make sure you click on the link in the show notes to contact me if there's a need for an outside construction executive coach. And I'll catch you on the next episode.